Welcome to Season 1, Episode 2, Rise from the Shadows. I'm your host, Trip Bodenheimer. It's not about me, it's about our guest that we got today, and I'm honored to have with me Master Sergeant in the United States Air Force, Joshua Stewart. Josh has 14 years of experience in the United States Air Force. He's down here in Montgomery, Alabama with his family. He is currently a professional military education instructor as part of the Enlisted Professional Military Education Instructor course. This is basically the course where the instructors learn how to teach. So he's the instructor for the instructors. But he's remarkable at what he does. He's actually created his own courses. He's got a communication course. He's now teaching emotional intelligence, which he's going to plug those at the end as well. So if you like what you hear from him and you would like for him to come out to your company, to your business, to your school, to your Airman Leadership School, your Non-Commissioned Officer Academy, you name it, he's going to have all his contact info as well. But he's going to talk to you today about his grandmother and what his grandmother taught him. You know how it is. As kids, we listen to our parents, we listen to our grandparents, and we kind of write off what they say. We're like, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't really get that message. I don't understand why they're talking to me a certain way. But looking back, he understands through a life of trauma what those lessons were now and what it meant to him. So he's going to talk to us about learning to live within your suffering and not to wallow in it. So folks, enjoy this episode of Rise from the Shadows with Joshua Stewart.
All right. Well, first off, I appreciate you letting me come here and tell my story. It's not the most amazing story. It's not the most happy story, but it definitely is mine. And I always try to give this disclaimer anytime I tell one of my stories is that I don't think that my story is any kind of special or that anyone couldn't relate to it. Because I think that hearing it, there'd be plenty of things that people can relate to when it comes to just the topic at hand. And really, what I want to talk about is just something I've struggled with and something I want to pass down to my kids. Something I hope that I can have them learn to do, even if I'm not around. And that is just really learning to live in your suffering. I know that sounds super negative, but learning to live in it and not wallow in it, because I think maybe it's hereditary, maybe it's something, but I have a disposition that can be a little bit wallowing. So I can kind of just start from the beginning. When I was much younger, I was basically raised by my grandmother and my mom, and God love them. They did the best they could to raise me, but they definitely used a lot of baby talk to the point where I had a speech impediment. I could not say my R's at all. And you can imagine going to school and anything that makes you stand out from any of the other kids, you kind of get picked on for that. So at first I thought, okay, there's something wrong with me. And people did kind of treat me different, like, oh, he's got a handicap because he can't speak right, and he just can't get it. And it took until the third grade and a good speech therapist to kind of help me work out of that. And I don't say that to belittle what my grandmother and mother did, but they were the main two people in my life, and I was definitely their baby. So that's the point to that. They were definitely babying me as much as they could. So in the beginning, everything was pretty much a good time, a happy time, even if my dad, he was a construction worker doing the best he could to, make money for us, but he was never at home. He would come home maybe once a weekend when it comes to a month, like 1 month in, I'm home for the weekend. And then he heads back out to work. But that's nothing on him. He was trying to do his thing. But when he would come home, he would want to party. So he has 7 sisters and a brother. Huge family. I have like 60 cousins, and family get-togethers was just their thing. And he would bring people over to the house, and that's not bad in and of itself. But the problem is he really liked to drink. to the point of blacking out, not knowing what's going on. So I was used to when dad came home, it was party time and celebration time. And that kind of all ended when someone actually died at one of those parties. And I'll never really forget it. I was about 5, maybe 6 years old, and everybody had pretty much left. My dad was passed out on the couch, and hear this gigantic crash outside in the front yard. And me being a 5, 6 year old, it's probably closer to midnight, 1 a.m. I'm still awake. I run out there to check things out because it's just my mom and one of my aunts cleaning things up. And the last person to leave, he was pulling out in his motorcycle, and a car crashed into him. So my mom panics because she knows, okay, something bad has happened. She tells me, go back inside, go back inside. But come on, you can't tell a 5 year old go back inside when they've heard this big crash. They see sparks everywhere. Like, they're coming to check. But my memory of that isn't just the sparks and the crash. It was the individual ended up passing away. But as they were loading him up onto the ambulance, his leg fell off. And I'll never forget, I learned what a death rattle was at that point. If you don't know what that is, it's the gurgling sound you make as you're passing away. It's from saliva, blood, whatever the case is. It's something that really, really stuck with me. And my grandmother at the time, she knew something's wrong. Like, he's 5, 6. He saw this death up close. Like, I'm going to do my best to give him life advice. But my grandmother, being like her, I guess you could say, her advice was, cheer up. You've only got about 70 years to live. And if you think that's a long time, but then you're still just thinking like a kid. And at the time I was just like, what does that mean? A 6-year-old, like, I've got 70 years left. I couldn't even compute it. And so it didn't really stick with me, but the words did stick with me because I knew she was trying to cheer me up. But after that, no more parties at our house happened. That was done. But soon after seeing that, I had a best friend. He was my uncle. He was about 21, and he would always come over, play video games with me, everything. Well, he was going to be coming to see me in a month. He gets in a car crash and he passes away. And that was a few months after I had seen that. And so it's like, all right. And in my little 5, 6-year-old brain, I'm thinking all these crazy things and thinking of his leg falling off. And, I talked to my mom and my grandmother, and they help me the best they can. But then it just seemed like more and more started happening this time. I don't know if it's still a problem nowadays, but back in like the 80s and 90s, the way the trucks and cars were built, it had lots of rooms for animals to crawl up in it. I don't know if it's still like that, but we had a lot of cats. And soon after my uncle had passed away, like still grieving and everything, my mom goes and starts the car. It was a truck, and there was a cat in there. And the poor thing, its back end got stuck in it. But my mom, being young, not knowing what to do, she's like, okay, you hold the cat. We're going to drive to the veterinarian. And so I'm sitting here holding this cat, and it just kind of dies right there. And I was just like, oh, goodness. And so my grandmother, again, knowing like, okay, he's seen a lot of things these past 6 months, kept trying to cheer me up and kept trying to say, hey, life isn't just about these things. And, hearing these things like, okay, you saw a cat die, looking back, okay, you saw some bad things. But they just kind of built up as a kid. And I think it kind of made it to where I'm more likely when I see something, I see the worst of things first. And then I try to pick up the pieces and say, oh no, well, that doesn't mean the worst is going to happen, but I tend to think the worst first. But my grandma helped me get past that a lot, even though she was doing it in her a little bit of a pessimistic way. What didn't help things is while my dad was working construction, we're in lower Alabama. We're poor as all get out. And my father, he goes and tries to lift this heavy thing, ruptures a bunch of discs in his back. And so he ends up having to have some surgeries. But what that ends up doing is he can't work anymore. Like he just can't. And so my mom, she kind of has a job on the side, but she has to start working more. And it's like, okay. So I don't know if y'all know about how workman's comp works, but you have to go through this whole process to prove you got hurt on work, and you have to wait to see how much percentage you're going to get. Well, it took a very long time, and we were close to losing the house before it happened. And then my mom was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And it's like, all right, my dad's back got so bad, he was on fentanyl patches, which if y'all know anything about fentanyl, whenever you use fentanyl, it kind of put him down for a couple days. Like he was just out. But then as my mom is going through all of her cancer, she goes through her surgeries. She's dealing with this stuff. At this point, I'm like turning 13 years old, and all this stuff is kind of built up. And so I'm expecting the worst, and I'm expecting the worst. But the point to that is that we weren't making any money at that point. We were getting very close to losing the house. But then workman's comp came in, and we were able to keep the house, but it was like struggle, definitely struggle. And so, you know, what you do when you're struggling, you eat the struggle meals, lots of ramen, lots of spam, just the cheap stuff that we could get, trying to make sure that we're taken care of. But at the same time, we weren't affording anything fancy. But I kind of got this mentality where I felt like everything was against me. And I'd go to my grandmother and be like, hey, you know, I want this and I want that. And I can't believe this is happening. You know, coming from a 13-year-old, I probably sounded like woe is me at the time. But she said something else to me that at the time, I was just like, okay, whatever. But I won't forget it now. And she was like, well, if you had everything that you wanted, what would you ever have to look forward to? I was like, yeah, you would say that to somebody who doesn't want, you know, who wants all this stuff. But that kind of stuck with me over the years. But turn 18 and the usual stuff happens: relationship problems, adult issues, working, doing your best to make by. And then I started to, all that suffering that I had seen or perceived in my life, I just started to kind of wallow in it because nothing was really going right for me. I was staying in this very small town in Alabama. All I did was play video games, go to work, and I would self-medicate with caffeine and, you know, things of that to make it where I don't really sleep a lot. So pretty much shooting myself in the foot. So on top of my perceived suffering, I'm making myself physically suffer just by not taking care of myself. And again, my grandma lived next door to me. I was in a house by myself, but my grandma, she'd always come over, ask me how I'm doing, do those mental health checks that you do with people. And at the time I did not like it. I was like, oh my God, I'm fine. Leave me alone. You know, you get irritated because, okay, grandma, you're always around. Go away, get out of here. Well, I finally had enough. I said, it's time for me to do something. And I had been wanting to join the military for a long time, but I was 23, 24 years old, and I finally joined the Air Force. But before I did that, I kind of had an argument with my grandmother, like had an argument with her because she was always trying to build me up and do all this other stuff. And I was like, you're just too positive. Like I can't handle it. And it was the common young adult type stuff. And the thing about it is like, not only was she doing that for me, she was like a community figure for our church. She was always, to the detriment of herself, helping everybody. If a new family came into town and they were struggling, she was trying to raise the money. If there was someone she knew was homeless, she's offering those people places to live. And like, we're like, grandma, you don't know these people. You're going to get hurt one day. Don't do that. She was so trusting and trying to be helpful. And even then I was just like, oh, that's so annoying. Stop. What are you doing? And so I joined the military. Well, finally, I kind of stopped wallowing in my suffering and I get myself out of it. I get married. I'm doing all this stuff. Well, um, as soon as I get married, my grandmother has like this really bad stroke. And I'm talking like the type that you don't necessarily recover from. They had some skilled doctors down at Dothan, and they were able to save her through some crazy stuff. I mean, I'm talking like they removed half of her brain. They took the skull, the top of her skull, and they put it into her stomach because if you didn't know, that kind of stuff will die if you take it out. So it can stay alive as long as it's under the skin. Didn't know this kind of stuff, but was completely amazed by it. Like, wow, Modern medicine is amazing, but she was able to survive this massive, massive stroke. But as most people know, once someone has a stroke, they're not necessarily this person that comes back from the stroke isn't necessarily the same person that they were before. And so at first, it seemed like she was going to do a very good recovery. The pieces of her brain that they did remove, like it wasn't too bad, but she was able to talk afterwards. She remembered stuff. Everything was good. And we were good to go, we thought. Uh, but they gave her about 6 months to live after that because they were like, this isn't really sustainable. And so we were all prepared, like, okay, Granny Jane, she's not really going to make it. Well, that is not necessarily what happened. 7 years go by, and she is still just there. She's not only just there, she's still talking, but she has started to degrade over time. And on the seventh year, she stopped basically talking. And it was hard at the time because it's like, I, I want her to meet our grandchildren, but for my kids to go and see her, it's not the same person. But we still took them down there. We still visit, and we still like tried to talk to her. But after 9 years, December 2019, she did pass away. Uh, it's not that it was a shock at the time. We'd been expecting it years and years before, but at the time, it was just, it kind of hit us hard because she had fought that whole time. And from the 7 year mark to the 9 year mark, she hadn't really talked. She hadn't really moved. And when me and the kids would come visit, she would become more active. She would open her eyes a little bit, and it was like, okay, maybe she'll come back. We had a little bit of hope there, but at that 9 year mark, she stopped struggling, and we were happy that she wasn't suffering anymore. But it really, that whole thing in 2019 really got me to remember the things that she had said to me. I had left her on a bad note. I had argued with her. And when I left to go to the military, I didn't really call back. I didn't say much, but she had always been in my corner. Um, and for a person that was always trying to help other people, she did go through a lot of suffering in her life without much complaint. And then all of the stuff she used to tell me, came back to me. If you had everything you wanted, then what would you have to look forward to? And I tell my kids that today, and even now, I sit here at 37 years old, and she's what she said is like, hey, you only got about 70 years to live. If you think that's a long time, you're still thinking like a kid. And then when you think like percentage wise, I'm at 37, it's like, man, is that the 50% mark? Wow. Like she wasn't kidding. And if she were alive today, she would have hit 75 this year. So she was even right about that. And I know a lot of this can sound kind of negative, but the point of it is that I spent so much time like just laser focused on the suffering that I was going through that I kept causing myself to suffer, even when she was trying to bring me out of it. She saw it. Uh, and, I kind of like pushed her to the side uh, yeah. And seeing how my kids reacts to what I tell them now, because at the end of the day, yes, life is about suffering. You're going to suffer. You're going to go through something, but it doesn't have to mean that you just sit there and wallow in that suffering. And it's something she was trying to teach me from day one that I wasn't necessarily picking up. And like most things in life, until you experience more or get that, I realize it now. And so just trying to remember her through the kids, and still, because it's still there, still dealing with that, oh, hey, let me assume the worst thing is going to happen over here. And remembering like, okay, hey, that's just what you've kind of been programmed to do from childhood. Like, we got to make sure we're on the right path here. And just hearing her words over and over again, like a mantra, they help out. They help out. And even going and listening to all the Air Force stuff that we teach and that we go through. Attitude is everything. Yeah, yeah. And that's basically what she was telling me. I see her words and all of the core values, all the things she was trying to tell me. It just happened a little bit too late. So trying to live more in the present, to make sure that, yeah, while life is about suffering, it doesn't have to mean that I stay in that suffering. But I think that goes for everybody. Like I said, my story is not really unique, or nothing like completely horrible is happening to me. But during that, I'm sure anybody can see some bits and pieces of their story in that and say, well, yeah, I've suffered this way and maybe even more. But we all know what it feels like to be in that moment of suffering and say, hey, I want to get out of this. But we also know those moments where we just kind of sit in it. And it got me thinking of like, why do we do that? Why do we just stay in that mode of suffering where we're not helping ourselves out? We have these loved ones that are just like trying to pull us out of there, and we stay there. But that's who she was. And I think at the end of the day, she had pulled me out before. I just hadn't realized it yet. So uh, trying to remember her moving on. But yeah, that's the story.
First of all, I appreciate you coming on here and doing this. I know whenever I first was pitching the idea of doing Rise from the Shadows, I told you you were one of the first people I wanted to have on here, because I've heard you talk, several of your briefs, not just teaching, but the content that you've created here at EPMEIC, and I thought it would just be brilliant. And yeah, the story you were talking about, I'd heard a lot of that from when we had to share an office together.
Yep.
And we had a lot of these conversations with one another. What's the one thing as an educator that you feel like, you looking back, you picked that up from your grandmother?
So my grandma, she just really liked to share. And I think the biggest thing for a teacher isn't that you want to stand over someone and educate them and tell them what's right and wrong. You want to share the information that you have. And from that, you want to have others share information with you so that you can continue it going. It's like a chain letter type thing. And I think that's what she was all about. She was always trying to share information, share the things that she had, and just make people's lives better. And I think that's what teachers can do if they are of the same mind. Like, it's all about sharing information, and not information that you think someone needs, information that they actually need for themselves.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't have it.
And you're on here sharing a message about your grandmother,
Yeah.
and the stuff that she taught you. If your kids were to do the same 30 years from now, they're on here talking about stuff you taught them, what would you want them to say about you?
Oh man, it's just thinking. I hope that they would say that uh, what what I did, they're proud of. That's the biggest thing. Even if they're struggling with things like I have, just to be able to say that my dad helped me out this way. He's got some good information to help me push through this as well. That would make me happy, because that's the end goal, right? Is for them to be happy in their lives, and uh, just moving forward the way they want to, not for me to tell them what they need to be doing.
And I kind of alluded to, the courses that you've been teaching, and the content that you've really created here that's now part of our course. But for someone out there listening, whether it's someone in professional military education, someone out there civilian world, a little pitch here for you to sell all the amazing courses you're teaching, and then who can take those courses?
When it comes to the communication lesson and the emotional intelligence lesson, anybody. So, as you know, I've been offering it to anybody that's willing to listen. So, to share that information, I can do it on Zoom, I can do it on Teams, and getting to the point where I'm willing to try to work something out to come to where you are to teach it as well.
And communication lesson, what exactly does that one consist of?
So I know that's pretty generic. You're like, oh, a communication lesson. Like, wait, what does that mean? So mine particularly focuses on perception, the Socratic method, Aristotle's rhetorical triangle, and Plato's allegory of the cave. And I know those are all like, yeah, those sound pretty collegey, and yeah, I've read that stuff. I know that stuff, but I try to take it into the lens of people say perception's reality, but what does that actually mean? And how do you talk to yourself when it comes to the way that you create your own reality, your subjective reality? But gets far deeper into that. Got a couple different versions of it. I have a full course 4 hour version, and I've got the quick down and dirty version that's 1 hour. Depending on the needs of the audience, I could do 4 hour, up to 4 hours, down to 1 hour.
Yeah, and it's very relevant to everybody's life. I mean, it's one thing that my class that, I'm going through right now, they keep commenting back, especially, allegory, the cave.
Yep.
And the way you explain it, and I can vouch for this because I've seen Stewart teach this probably more times than anybody else, but
Yeah, probably.
super relatable. And like you said, it sounds like a college, and it is very much a college level course, but he makes it so easily relatable to where you can apply it to your life. So definitely suggest anybody gets an opportunity, whether you are in or out of the military, you have a work group, college, business, Airman Leadership School, you name it, definitely hit him up for that. And if they want to find out more about it or want you to either come out and teach it now that all these travel bans have been lifted, or if they want you to do it virtual, how can they contact you?
Got a couple different ways. You can contact me at my military email, which is joshua.stewart.11@us.af.mil. You can also get me at my non-military, which is the exact same, except it's joshua.stewart.11@au.af.edu. And then anybody else that's looking for me, you can find me on Facebook. I'm Joshua M. Stewart. You can shoot me a DM on there, and we can try to work things out. Pretty active on some of the 8T pages, so should be pretty easy to find. And if you're friends with Bodie, I'm a shared friend on there, so you can find me there as well.
More than likely, if they're listening, they're probably some sort of friend with me.
Yeah, maybe.
That's all my 10 listeners are usually friends with me. But yeah, man, I appreciate you taking time to do this. Final comments for our listeners.
So I know some of the stuff I sounded was a little bit negative, and people kind of read me off that way. But I think unless we approach things realistically and embrace that negativity, that we won't be able to find the positive at the end of the day, because people tend to shy away from it. Kind of like the Inside Out movie. Sadness is, go over here. But I think that if we embrace it, talk about it, and move through it together, we're much more likely to come out on top when it comes to finding meaning within ourselves. Like, what's the meaning of life? That depends on what you want. And I think that takes a lot of internal talk when it comes to the good and the bad that's inside of you. So.
Sweet. Well, hey, man, I appreciate you taking time to do this. I know we've been talking about this for quite some time, getting you on here to do it. You definitely were the closest proximity to me than anybody ever to be on any of my podcasts. But yeah, appreciate you taking time. And folks, hit him up. I'm telling you, this training is so worth it. He can do it for large groups, small groups, you name it. Take advantage of this opportunity. But folks, that is all the time we have for this episode of Rise from the Shadows.